So, welcome everybody to the grand final of HKBPDC 2016. I would like to congratulate all the teams who have made it to the finals. In opening government today, we have Oh Honey. In opening opposition, we have CKY1. In closing government, we have DGS2. And in closing opposition, we have LPCUWC 2. My name is Masha, and I am the chair for the grand final. Along with me, I have on the panel Reina, Chitra, Lily, Rohan, Holmes, and Paul. Before we start the debate, I would like to make some few clarifications. For the audience, during the debate, please make sure the phones are switched off. And also, if you want to applaud for the speakers, don't do it during their speeches because it will distract the adjudicators. If you want to exit the room, then you should do it in between the speeches, not during the speeches. Having said that, on the motion that this House celebrates the Donald Trump campaign, I would now like to request the Prime Minister to open the debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, today as the Prime Minister of Side Government, I'll be telling you exactly why we would actually celebrate Donald Trump's campaign, right? As a Prime Minister today, I'll tell you exactly how Donald Trump is actually better represents the people of the United States under the current status quo. While my my second speaker will tell you more about how people actually find it, how voting for Donald Trump is an interpretation demonstrates how people actually want to vote for him, which is a good thing, which we'll prove later on. So, let me tell you about exactly what Donald Trump represents and how he actually represents a commonly unrepresented group, right? We think that in the current status quo, the voting system in America usually results in where we have two dominating groups that lead towards the end of the campaign, right? Most of the time, you see the Democrats and the Republicans. We think that under the current status quo, when you have a third or different party come in who have mixed views of both sides or just different views, it's more difficult for them to actually have their views represented because most of the time they're dominated by the most dominated parties usually are the Democrats and the Republicans. What we see in the current status quo is that, for example, if the Democrats held 40% of the votes and the Republicans held 50% of the votes, and let's say this third party held 10% of the votes right now, if this third party was leaning more towards the Democrats, what we're seeing right now is that they take away 10% of voters that would potentially vote for the Democrats under the system of where they could only choose one of the two, right? And we think that what happens is that it actually worsens the case for this third party because while they lean towards one side, what happens as a result of them gaining voters in the first place is that it makes the side that they don't want to win have a higher chance of winning, right? So we think that under the current system, it's very difficult for these third parties with views that aren't completely Democratic and that aren't completely Republican to be represented. So we think that this is an underrepresentation of the population in the United States. So what does Donald Trump actually represent? The reason why we would celebrate what Donald Trump has achieved right now is because under this system, Donald Trump is able to represent both somewhat mixed views of both what is considered a Democrat and both what is considered Republican views, right? We see that Donald Trump is pro-parenthood, but at the same time, he's anti-immigrant. And we think that while he did choose to become Republican, which isn't that important at the end of the day, the fact is that under the system of where there are two dominating parties, he was able to become a candidate that was one of the front runners for one of the more dominating campaigns and show views that represent slightly mixed views. We think that the success that he has with his ability to do so is a demonstration of him being able to actually fully represent more of the population. And it's better because we think that he actually does represent more of the population now as a result of the fact that he has kind of mixed views to some extent, right? And we think that this is important, that we finally have a candidate that actually is able to represent these to some extent mixed views in the first place, right? Because we see that in the current system, this voting system makes it very difficult for the group of people who don't necessarily strictly follow Democrats and don't strictly follow the Republicans to have their views actually represented. These third-party views are commonly unrepresented when we have the elections, right? So we think that Donald Trump's success is something that we should be celebrating because now he's representing a group of people that oftentimes aren't represented most of the time under the system. They try to beat the system, right? So we think that Donald Trump, with his ability to actually stay in the system in the current status quo, is able to fully represent their people. But before I move on, yes.
Yeah, even if Donald Trump becomes the front-runner of Republican debate, isn't there only going to be two candidates at the end in the presidential elections after, no matter?
Thank you. Thank you. Precisely. We think that, what we're trying to say is that Donald Trump, if he becomes one of the candidates, and with showing success right now, if he does become one of the two candidates at the end, we think that because his campaign reflects not just completely fully Republican side and that he has somewhat mixed views, that he's able to represent a population that was underrepresented if the candidate was fully Republican or if the candidate was fully Democratic to begin with, right? And this is something that we should be celebrating because the fact that Donald Trump is able to be successfully front-running the Republican campaign with these type of mixed views and have a possibility of these mixed views someday coming out into real life is a demonstration. It's actually improving the democracy that's happening in the United States. Because if these views are actually the fact that they're going to be the fact that these views are going to be held out in the future, we think that the fact that they're being heard in the first place is very important. And we think that that's a very integral part of why we think that we should be celebrating Donald Trump's campaign. Because now these ideas that are often unheard in the first place are now being heard. And we think that in a democracy, what's most important is participation, right? And we think that the fact that with his success, we are able to have the group that usually isn't able to fully participate because their views aren't heard out, be able to fully participate in the political sphere and in the system right now, for their voices to actually be heard in the status quo, right? And this is something because we see that in America right now, because we see in the current system that we want it to become more democratic. We think that it's a good thing that now these voices are actually being heard, that now there's more perspectives being there, because that's fundamentally what democracy is built upon: the participation and the fact that people, the different.
Can you please explain the simplification of how these candidates are either fully Democratic or fully Republican in most cases?
Thank you. I think that we think that in most cases, when you have a fully Democratic candidate, and we have a fully Republican candidate, that unlike Donald Trump right now, if we had cases where they were, let's say they were they were anti-immigration, right? Like what Donald Trump's more Republican side would show. We think that for other different parts, if we were on a debate on adulthood, right, people may often have different views on different topics, right? We think that if a candidate was fully like one side, then most of their views on all of these different topics would have a very Republican type of perspective, right? It would be anti-immigration. It wouldn't be Planned Adulthood or something like that, right? We think that in this scenario. Donald Trump is different because even though he has selected to join the Republican campaign, we think that his views do represent more than just simply completely Republican views. And we think that that's important, and which is why we think that we should be celebrating Donald Trump's campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I would now like to invite the Leader of Opposition to open the case from the opposition side.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so the Prime Minister had been going on and on about how Donald Trump is not fully Republican and he's not fully Democratic, and therefore he offers more perspectives for the voters. Firstly, we don't understand what do they mean by fully Republican candidate. Can they name one single candidate that can embody the entire Republican Party stance? Because we don't think we can actually characterize anyone to be fully Republican or to be fully Democrat. And also, we don't understand why Donald Trump must be the one for us to offer multiple perspectives. If we want to achieve more perspectives, they can actually add 10 more candidates to the Republican campaign. Why does it need to be Donald Trump? They have not told us about why Donald Trump had been able to be the only one that is able to offer multiple perspectives. Because, as we have said, they can actually just add more people into the Republican campaign that can actually represent those people who are not fully Republican, as they have said. So we don't understand why Donald Trump is so special in this debate right now. So, moving on to my substantives. Today I will talk to you about 2 points. How Donald Trump's campaign perpetuates the racism and sexism in the status quo, and second, how he himself can send the wrong message to the public about the perception of money in politics, the importance of money in politics. Now first, as we all know, Donald Trump has been blatantly sexist and racist on multiple occasions, such as in the Fox News debate. He had made very sexist comments regarding Megyn Kelly. He also said that Mexicans are rapists. So, what happens if a presidential candidate says these types of things on TV? We see that these types of comments are unacceptable, whether in the general society, but this will actually cause more tangible harms if they are broadcasted where every single person in the society can watch it on TV. Why is that so? Because when you are a presidential candidate, it adds legitimacy to what you are saying. Like, the identity as a presidential candidate, like running for a nomination, makes you more credible, makes you more convincing, and makes you more convincing to the audiences that are watching you on TV at home. So what will children think? What will children without a fully developed mindset think when they see Donald Trump making these misogynistic remarks about women? What will they think when they see Donald Trump making these remarks about Muslims or Mexicans being rapists or drug dealers? They will simply think that it's okay to say these things on TV, and they will actually, some sectors of society might actually look up to him because he indeed has achieved many things in life, and he himself is being presented as one of potentially America's leading man, a potential American president. So why does his identity make it more harmful? Because his identity has enabled people, has a wide viewership, especially under the media sensationalism. Many media outlets choose to portray him as the one and only person who isn't afraid to speak his mind because he isn't tied to any affiliations from corporations. Why is this harmful? This is harmful because his views will then be taken seriously by some sectors of the society where people might think that he is legitimate, where people might think that he is credible simply because he is a presidential candidate. And this is way more harmful than any racist or sexist comments that are not on TV. My main point is that people would look up to these presidential candidates, and whatever they say on TV would have some sort of credibility for the viewers, and that is ultimately detrimental to the society. On to my second substantive, why Donald Trump's portrayal of himself as a billionaire and he can do whatever he wants, why this message is ultimately harmful. So we've seen throughout Donald Trump's campaign that he has said, "I am very rich," more than 100 times, I guess. Now, he reiterates this fact because he thinks having money can allow him to do whatever he wants, and he can show how he doesn't receive funding from other corporations, and therefore he is quite an independent candidate that can say whatever he wants and express his opinions without the limitations of other corporations. Now, why is this detrimental? This is because he himself bragging about his wealth is sending a message that if you have wealth, you are able to offend people freely on television. Why does this matter? This matters because most viewers that are watching the Fox debates are less rich than Donald Trump. When they say racist or sexist comments, they will be condemned. But when they see Donald Trump on TV, not condemned by his fellow candidates and able to continue to express his racist and sexist sentiments, they feel like, oh, that means when you have money, you can say whatever you like and you can offend whoever you want.
Yes. And do you think it's justified that Hillary Clinton is actually garnering the support of superdelegates because of her resources?
I think Hillary Clinton has I don't think Hillary Clinton is actually related to this debate at all because we're talking about Donald Trump right here. So what Hillary Clinton wants to say is her business, but Donald Trump has been continuously expressing his racial, racist, and sexist sentiments on TV, and simultaneously bragging about his wealth. So the link between these two factors is that people think when you have money, you can be like Donald Trump, i.e., you can say whatever you want, you can offend anybody you like. The inherent harm in here is that we are sending a message that wealth overweighs morality in politics. If you're rich, you're allowed to be morally corrupted. If you are rich, you're allowed to insult women. If you are rich, you are allowed to insult other minority races simply because you are rich and you don't have any ties to any corporations. The idea that rich people do not receive repercussions for their words or actions is exacerbated by the Donald Trump campaign, where we see on TV that nobody actually condemns him for what he says when it's actually very, very racist and sexist. And it also reemphasizes the difference in status based on wealth in the society. So when less economically capable people see Donald Trump being able to express the same racist and sexist comments as they do when they are condemned and Donald Trump isn't, we are sending the message that wealth overweighs morality, and if you're rich, you're allowed to basically insult everyone, offend everyone, and say whatever you like in politics. And that's not the political system that USA should be having. And this is what my Deputy Leader of Opposition will be elaborating on today. And that's why today's motion must and will fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. I would now like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to present his case. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we on side government. What we strongly stand for is we strongly stand for the element of democracy, of people being represented when they have views, and this is what something side opposition does not support. So today, before I move on to my substantive, I would like to clarify the points given to us by the Prime Minister. Right. So the opposition has come up and say, oh, how can you have a candidate that's like fully Republican or fully Democratic? How will we see Donald Trump has very, very anti-Republican views, right? He's pro-welfare, he's pro-Planned Parenthood, and let me remind you, Republicans in the House, in the establishment, and in the American legislature are trying to actively defund Planned Parenthood, right? We see he both holds views that are very traditional in line with Republican orthodoxy, like anti-immigration, being very nationalistic, and he holds views that are very in line with the Democratic orthodoxy, like social welfare. And we see that it's important that these people are represented, right? And so we see the reason why he's running Republican, right? And the reason why we celebrate his campaign so much is you can't run as a third party, right? If Donald Trump ran as a third party and he got all this support that he's getting, like for example, 40% nationwide in the Republican polls, we see that would only draw that support away from the Republican. The voters would see this is only drawing support away from the Republican Party that they like more than the Democratic Party, right? So we see Donald Trump is showing that there is this group that does not fall neatly into these two parties in a system that is inherently two-party, where any third party is detrimental and it's impossible to function for long periods of time because of the spoil effect, because you spoil the party you like the most and give the party you like the least more support. And we also see this idea that side opposition comes up, and they say, "Oh, Donald Trump is getting, he's not being condemned because he's rich. He's getting away with this message because he's rich, and he's indoctrinating children." Right? And see, he's not like teaching children this in Sesame Street. What he is doing, right? He's running for president. He has been condemned many times by all the other candidates, by mainstream Republican magazines like National Journal. And what we see, right, the reason his message is so strong is not because he's rich, but because people agree with him. And we see that in a democracy, it's good that there's participation, and this is being brought to the light, which I will go into. Thank you. Which I will go into more in my substantive. Right. So in my substantive, I'll firstly talk about why, right, contrary to what side opposition says, why it's good that he's rich, why, how that this impacts our democratic government. And secondly, I'll talk about dog whistle politics and why it's good that, why it's actually good that Donald Trump is saying all these racist and sexist things. So, firstly, we see that, right, unlike our contemporary politics, where everything is run by campaign finance, so we see a lot of the Republican field have to go try to court rich donors like the Koch brothers, and Hillary Clinton very close with a lot of people on Wall Street, where money runs the elections, and you have to go to corporations and be friendly to corporations and other rich people to be able to run a sustainable campaign. We see Donald Trump is rich, and so he doesn't have this incentive to go begging and crawling to rich corporations and rich individuals, which makes him makes him an independent candidate, able of supporting raising taxes on the rich, for example. And we see this is beneficial in an election where in the United States, we have super PACs where money is the key, and all candidates are incredibly aware of money and trying to try to gather money. But we also see, right, contrary to, right, we see why is it good that, moving on to my next point, why is it good that Donald Trump is saying all these sexist and racist things, right? We see, as I said earlier in my rebuttal, right, he is able to say all these things because he continues to get support because of what he's saying, right? People agree with him. However, what we see, yes.
So, do you agree with the spread of racist and sexist views?
But we see he is not the one that's spreading racism and sexism. He's just explicitly showing this racism and sexism, and we see there's no inherent. So we see what he's doing. He's showing that, look, right, I can be very popular. I can say these things, and we see where does racism and sexism come from? Right, racism and sexism comes implicitly from channels like Fox News and other Republican candidates, when they use coded words that only the minorities get, right? Words like inner city for African Americans or urban, and we see this kind of coded language, is implicit racism, is very well established in the Republican Party, right? We see most Republican candidates, right? They don't want to let Muslim refugees into the country, right? But they're just not as explicit, not as obvious as Donald Trump. But we see the problem is still there, right? The fact that 47% of people, roughly, I don't know the numbers exactly, but we see when it's 40% of Republicans support Donald Trump, right? The problem is not the fact that Donald Trump is running. The problem is 40% of people support these racist and sexist things. And we see we cannot deal with a problem that is implicit and hiding in the shadows. But you disagree.
And so won't you agree that by Donald Trump having so much support stating these comments, that is regretful for America's population to see that these comments have been spread up around?
These comments are, right, we see anybody else can say this, right? This racism and sexism is already present, as I said. And so it's important that we're able to combat it. We can't combat a problem of racism and sexism. We can't say there's a racism and sexism problem, right? Well, I'm the candidate against racism and sexism. This is a huge problem in society if it's not shown, if it's not visible. And we see this is another reason why we celebrate Donald Trump, because he has made this racism and sexism very visible, right? He's actually explicitly saying what many Republican voters and many Republicans think implicitly, will say implicitly. And we see that by raising these issues, by bringing these ideas up, we said it allows a path where we can actually recognize this problem. You can actually have concrete proof that you can say, look, this party has a problem with racism because of all these issues, and this allows minorities to see this incredibly explicitly. And so, ladies and gentlemen, what has opening government told you today, right? We've told you we celebrate Donald Trump because he's representing an otherwise unrepresented group. And we see, as my Prime Minister said, democracies need representation. Democracies need participation, which Donald Trump provides. What we've also shown you is that Donald Trump is a candidate that is not tied to money, because he has all this money, which allows him to campaign independently in an election which is so money focused. And ladies and gentlemen, finally, we said he's bringing the problem of racism to light. So this is why, ladies and gentlemen, this motion must stand.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I would now like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to present his case.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we see how opening government has centered the case towards how they think it should be celebrated. The fact that Donald Trump actually brings new representation to a part of opinion America, which we have stated is both racist and sexist. But however, the opposition thinks that such a case is not celebrated, should not be celebrated, but instead we are regretful for such cases. Now, they're trying to state that how Donald Trump, the emergence of Donald Trump actually represents a group that has never been represented before. But how our side would want to emphasize that Donald Trump did not largely change the political system and the political picture of America. He is a Republican candidate towards presidency. And what we see in November this year is still one Democrat candidate and one Republican candidate battling it out. So therefore we don't see how more people can be represented, because we see even within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, there are already many different sorts of opinions within the party. There are already lots of sorts of minor groups, and the way of these groups being catered is for these parties to have primary elections in which, for example, in the Republican side, there are already more than 10 candidates because there are so many opinions. And through these candidates representing, these opinions are already represented through the current political system. So we don't see why the additional of Donald Trump within this system, integrating into this system would actually make things much better and much more should be celebrated. Yes.
Do you think Donald Trump's campaign effectively garnered the attention of the previously politically apathetic or neutral group of voters?
But then we see, this will explain later about why Donald Trump, representing this group of neutral voters who has racist and sexist political views, should be regretted, which we continue in my substantive later. But now continuing on my substantive is saying that it's good for Donald Trump's sexist and racist comments to be reacted by the public as seeing the fact that these comments are widespread is actually regrettable, simply because although everyone would recognize that even before Donald Trump emerges, there are already racist and sexist views in America, which the opening government would surely agree. But the thing is, these comments are never truly seen as legitimate or never seen as truthful, because political figures or moral figures does not implement such opinions. So people may feel like, although I feel like I hate Hispanics in the country, but however I don't think these views should be legitimate, that these views should be voiced out. But the thing is, with Donald Trump here, they see, with Donald Trump here, they see a presidential candidate that can say these sorts of views and be approved by some of the public in America. It means that these public will start to feel that such racist, sexist comments are not regrettable, because simply a presidential candidate can say this and get majority support, which means that the opinion might be the opinion of the majority, and therefore it is fine for them to hold such views, and they will not feel how morally wrong they are by having such racist and sexist comments, which I should not need to elaborate. Now, moving back to my substantives, as explained by leader of opposition, the emergence of Donald Trump shows problems currently residing in American society, which already existed before Donald Trump. For example, the racist and sexist views within America, and also how people will look up to Donald Trump and think that money can make everything happen. And I'll continue on how Donald Trump's campaign is regrettable, because it shows flaws in American politics and deepens them. The first one, of course, is about how money dictates American politics. We see the case where Trump is one of the only candidates who do not need to have any fundraising events to enter election, as a proof that even though America claims to be the most democratic and liberal society in the world, to be the leader of America, you need a huge financial base, which means you need to please the people who have the money, which means the American politics are definitely largely dictated by money, and the emergence of Donald Trump directly proved this point.
Sir.
Yes?
Don't you think that this is already inherently in the system, and that the fact that Donald Trump is self-sufficient is better than Donald Trump being in a super PAC and being controlled by that super PAC?
But the thing is, of course I agree with your points that such problems in the system is already existent, but we think the emergence of Donald Trump should not be celebrated, because although Donald Trump, yes, maybe he represents people that does not need money, but the billionaires, he showed a new hope that billionaires can also enter politics, but it's also it also shows how regrettable American politics is, because people like Donald Trump, if they want to enter presidential campaigns, they can directly enter with their money. But ordinary citizens, although they may have some views as same as Donald Trump, who also wants to enter political campaigns, but because they don't have the finance of Donald Trump, they cannot. So what's the difference between No, thank you. But what's the difference between Donald Trump and ordinary citizens that want to enter politics? Only money. So this is regrettable because it shows how money is so key. Is one of the undeniable keys to success in American politics. No, thank you. And next up, it also shows the problem within the Republican Party, because the emergence of Trump has sparkled debates within the Republican Party and caused internal conflicts within the Republican Party. We see that the emergence of Donald Trump only proves and widens the gap of the opinion between the Republican Party. As we already see, long before Donald Trump and years ago, the conflict between conservative Republicans and radical Republicans had already been raging for years, and we see that this is a problem which Donald Trump raises once again and widens even more.
Point, sir.
Yes?
So don't you think the regrettability of other underlying issues is completely separate from whether or not his campaign is regrettable?
But we're saying that his campaign is regrettable because his campaign is the one that shows the problem and actively widens this problem, so therefore we think it's regrettable. But continuing on my substantive, that this shows that as a political party should be only representing a certain group of people with a certain opinion. But now we see that this one of the major political parties in America is actually under internal conflict and is undecided towards which route it should take, but then it's supposed to represent almost half of the population. So therefore we see how America's politics is dictated by two main political parties who will not be able to fully represent the people behind the party, and therefore will only be two separate political institutions which barely represent any of the American opinion. And finally, this also leads to the problem that this shows American people being ignorant. Because Donald Trump's comment, as seen from out of our part of the world, can easily be seen as ignorant to the world politics, ignorant to the world situation, and also people, by abiding to these racist and sexist comments, can easily show that they fully comply to these thoughts of the past centuries and not complying with the 21st century. So therefore, we see that Donald Trump raises problems within the American political system and actually makes them worse. But therefore, we see Donald Trump's campaign should not be celebrated, but instead regrettable. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. I would now like to invite the government member to present her extensions.
Two very simple rebuttals before I move on to my substantive. First, on the point about ignorance. Firstly, we reject their characterization that American people are being ignorant if they're actually supporting Donald Trump. We tell you that's simply not ignorance. It's a representation of social issues that are happening in society. It means that Donald Trump is actually aware of what the society is actually facing. It means that he's willing to actually tackle the problems that he sees in the society. We don't see why this is ignorance. But second question, which is a more important question we have to ask, why is sexism and racism and showing off well justified for Donald Trump? Firstly, we tell you opening opposition at the beginning till up to this point have never proved why candidates must always talk about things that are so-called politically correct or something that's so-called a moral high ground. They never justify to us why these comments shouldn't be made, because we say these sentiments are things that a normal human being can actually sense, right? But on the second response, we tell you in fact this is a strategy that Donald Trump uses to actually mirror the sentiments and also the moods of all American voters. And that's why we say it's justified for him to actually make such comments, because it directly reflects certain American voters what their views are. What their views actually are. So that's why we say it's justified for Donald Trump to actually make these sexist and racism comments. But on to the second idea about showing off his wealth. Firstly, we say there's an inherent contradiction within their case, right? Because their first speaker came up and told us that it's not fair for Donald Trump to keep on showing his wealth and saying that he's legit to be a candidate because he's very rich. But then their second speaker came up and told us that if you keep on showing off that you're rich, then you drown out the other less wealthy candidates. An inherent contradiction here, because they've conceded that these candidates must be really rich in order to actually run presidential campaigns. We want them to clarify their stance. So with that tackle, their case actually falls. And I'll later explain in my speech why Donald Trump actually made such comments about his wealth. So, moving on to my substantive. Firstly, on the psychology of voters, why these people actually want to support Donald Trump. We say the voters do not actually want candidates to know what they're facing in the society. They do not just want the candidates to know their pain, but also they want these candidates, more importantly, to actually represent and mirror their moods and also sentiments. And that is the reason why we say Donald Trump has actually garnered so much support from these people. Firstly, in terms of the promises he made, taking the example of ISIS and terrorist attacks, Donald Trump clearly expressed his hatred towards the terrorist groups. Right? The fact that he said he's going to bomb the crap out of ISIS when he becomes president already proves that he has this hatred towards terrorist group who has actually harmed their national security and national sovereignty. And this actually reflects clearly what the voters' expectations are for the government, which has never been bravely and directly pointed out by other presidential candidates. And that is why when Donald Trump has bravely pointed out the problems that the society is facing and bravely pointed out what these candidates what the voters expect from the candidates, he garners so much support from these voters. But before that, yes, opening.
Is he really bravely pointing out his stance, or is he just bluffing and trying to get attention?
Ma'am, we say firstly, it is a fact that he is actually pointing out some of the views that voters view. But even if he's trying to gain attention, we say it's fine, right? Because terrorist attacks, saying the example, is really something that American society is facing, and that's what we say. If he has actually taken the initiative to actually make the policy to actually fulfill this obligation as government to protect national security, we say there's no problem with that. Well. And also in response to opening opposition, yes, because Donald Trump is the only person who is brave enough to actually point out all these problems that America is facing. And that's what we say, he is the unique person who can actually garner so much support from voters. But secondly, in terms of solution, for example, in order to tackle public health care, he proposed a universal free public health care welfare to all citizens, right? We say this is the solution that he takes to actually cater to all the needs of citizens, especially the ones who are less economically privileged. And that's what we say. This also explains why he actually kept on emphasizing that he's very wealthy, right? Because he wants the people to know that he has the connections to actually give him so many resources to actually run the campaigns that he have actually promised to make. And this is a promise that he can make only when he keeps on emphasizing that he has the mandate and also has the resources to actually run the solutions to the problems that he have pointed out. This is the way he garners support from the voters. We don't see why there's a problem. But second substantive, how Donald Trump improves the prominence of American presidential election. 2 layers of analysis. Firstly, he also garners support from politically apathetic groups. The logic is this: because of the fact that Donald Trump has portrayed his public image by actually running a very loud and shambolic campaign and grabbing media coverage and media attention. And that's why these media coverages is even more accessible easily to the other apathetic groups. And secondly, we say because he has the largest social media footprint, for example, he has 5.6 million Twitter followers, it proves that he has a lot of connections and he constantly contacts with voters. And this is the way he actually garners attention even from the politically apathetic group. If not for Donald Trump, these politically apathetic groups won't even bother to care about politics, right? It's because Donald Trump has made such a large impact on the American presidential election. That's why he can actually broaden the pool of voters to such an extent. A second layer of analysis, how it heightens the guard of candidates. The fact that Donald Trump has actually made a lot of sharp attacks on other candidates, for example, Hillary Clinton, allows more space for more debates amongst American presidential candidates, right? And that's why candidates are in fact more incentivized and motivated to step up in the game so that they can actually improve their presidential campaign. And in fact, we say this can actually effectively improve the overall quality of presidential campaigns in the US. And that's what we say, it effectively improves the prominence of American presidential election. Ladies and gentlemen, if I were an American voter, I would totally vote for Donald Trump because he has actually pointed out everything that I want the Obama government to actually do. But whilst because of Donald Trump, that he has actually pointed out what I really want the government to do, I'll totally vote for Donald Trump. Please also vote for closing government. Thank you.
Thank you, government member. I would now like to invite the opposition member to present his case.
Madam Speaker, on closing opposition today, we want to make America great. But we want to make America great by highlighting the problems of the American electoral system and why we think that the whole reason of Donald Trump's success was not based on the idea that he actually represents the will of the people, but how he managed to manipulate the problems of an American electoral system. We think that in my extension today, I'll be looking at the real reason of Donald Trump's success, which is not the fact that he can reach out to a bunch of people, but it's the fact that he managed to exploit the right-wing media groups that are out there in society, and why we think that on this idea, we think that to celebrate is to therefore hide this idea, the problem of the right-wing media groups and their dominance in terms of putting exposure to these kind of candidates. Before we move on with any of this analysis, let's look at a bunch of rebuttals. Because on opening government today, they're talking about meaning the idea of how you better represent the people of the USA. Well, first of all, when we don't celebrate these things, we think that there are other candidates in the Republican Party who do the same thing too. We think, first of all, you represent the other wills of these kind of people. But more importantly, they came up with the idea and said that, first of all, well, you get people to be represented, draw people to him. We think that yes, but we need to analyze who, first of all, who is the actual group that Donald Trump really appeals to. We think that the only group that Donald Trump fully appeals to is the angry white men who are really xenophobic, who are Islamophobic, these kind of people. But we think that more importantly, yes, we think that, as I explained in my sentence later on, we think that you don't represent the people of the will by celebrating Donald Trump campaign because you highlight the problem, because the fact is, the problem the right-wing media groups, as I explained later on, is the fact that you essentially isolate the moderate Republicans who are there to cater towards different kinds of Republicans. We think that Republicans in today's society is not just angry white men. We think there's a whole spectrum, right? We think that there are radicals, there are moderates, these kind of people. We think that, first of all, as I look at my extension later on, you isolate these individuals. But secondly, you also highlight of how you celebrate them because you highlight the racism, or you highlight the fact that racism is such a predominant issue driving American electoral success. We think that okay, but the main point is we don't think that we think that racism. We think a lot of people already. We think that celebrating or not celebrating, you already know that this is an issue. But more like the fact that Donald Trump is running itself highlights the issue. But more importantly, we say that this is not the real issue in today's debate. We think that the real issue, as I explained later on in my substantive, is the idea of the right-wing media group's dominance. So so that's the opening dealt with. On closing government, the main idea that they brought up was the idea of how you improve American democracy by reaching out to apathetic voters. Again, as I look at my extension later on, we think that the reaching out to apathetic voters comes about as a result of the right-wing media group giving such exposure to Donald Trump and allowing him to be successful in the first place. But more importantly, we also say that when they talk about the idea of how other candidates have to step up their game in order to appeal to a lot of people, we say that that's not really the case. We think that, okay, in some situations, yes, we look at people like Ted Cruz or people like Ben Carson who are forced to completely change their manifesto, their political doctrine. We think that the problem with this is that when it comes to democracy, that's not actually reflective of their actual values. We think that that's just a plot to be able to appeal to people. We say that if these people somehow to get elected into government, we think that the problem here is that they don't actually reflect their own views. But more importantly, we say that the problem here is that you actually marginalize those moderate Republicans. We think that as a result of Donald Trump's electoral success, we think that there are moderate Republicans who are forced to drop out of the race, who are forced to be unable to actually represent the people, the moderate Republicans. We think in this case it's harmful to the principle of democracy because you have people who don't really have a candidate that feel that they can fully support them. So before we move on with any of this, no, thank you. So let's look at my substantive. First of all, let's recharacterize the idea of wealth on which our opening half talked about. Because you think the idea of wealth in financing your own campaign, we think that the detriment of this is not what opening opposition said, as you can say whatever you want to say. We think that this violates the idea of democracy. The reason for this is because we think that when it comes to democracy, when it comes to running electoral campaigns, you have to reach out to different groups. We think that even in the past, when it compares to independent groups in the past, we think that essentially they had to still reach out to a bunch of people in order to be able to represent them. And we think this is very good when it comes to things like ensuring participation in democracy because people feel that they are adequately represented. We think that the problem with Donald Trump and celebrating him is the fact that you can say that Donald Trump itself, his campaign only focuses on angry white men. And we think that there is no incentive for him to reach out. We think that celebrating, therefore, this idea acknowledges the idea that this happens. But more importantly, let's look at my real substantive, the major extension that we're going to contribute to this debate. What exactly is the real problem? We think that the real problem comes to the right-wing media group because because we think it's very important to realize that people don't necessarily fully agree with Donald Trump. The reason why he's doing so well in the electoral campaigns is the fact that he can reinforce his image as a sole Republican candidate thanks to media sources, biased media sources like Fox News and like these kind of stuff. I think that first of all, to celebrate in the sense to glorify the right-wing media. In terms of why is the case? We think that right-wing media is very crucial to its success and the idea of exposure, because we think that when it comes to a political campaign, when you're campaigning for like a lot of things, we think that it's not simply about having the right ideas or appealing to the right group of people. It's more about getting your views out there, getting your views out into society, and then being able to respond to it. But Form 1, yes ma'am. Yes, sir.
Don't you think that it's more important in the democracy that all voices, including those of angry white men, are?
Yeah, we say that that's happening, but the thing is when we celebrate them, we are to actually marginalize those moderate Republicans. We think that Donald Trump appeals to angry white men. We think that fine. We think that if we don't celebrate them, he'll still appeal to the angry white men. But we think that more importantly, to celebrate is to actually marginalize the moderate Republicans who are out there as I look on right now at my substantive. So we think that exposure is very important when it comes to things, because in order for you to be able to express your views, you have to have actually journalists coming after you, you have to hold press conferences, and you have to have things like the Republican debate, right? More important, the problem here is that we think that the media is not good in giving exposure when it comes to giving equal exposure to each candidate. The problem here is, however, is when this becomes unproportional. The fact that it becomes unproportional, the fact that you can influence exposure to certain candidates. Why is this a problem when it comes to things like Donald Trump? Because we think that Donald Trump itself represents the idea of partisan politics. The fact that he's very polar, very radical. And we think that that's important when it comes to looking at the incentive structure of these kind of media groups, right-wing media groups. Why is this the case? We think partially because their shareholders are right-wing, but more importantly is the idea that politics is now seen as a sort of entertainment. The fact that you can say any ridiculous things out there, controversial things out there, we think that that will be listened to. Why is this bad? We think this drowns out the idea of other candidates, first of all, like the moderate Republicans, moderate candidates. Because in Republican debates, it's very important, like airtime, like Fox News, very important for them to be able to express their own views. But we think that that's not the case when you look at things like how in the actual Republican debates, that Donald Trump, because of his partisan views, therefore is very he's getting much more airtime than other Republican candidates. But more importantly, we say that this is very important when it comes to changing the mentality, because we think that other candidates lose their voice and not able to reinforce their message. Why is this detrimental? Because we think that first of all, you violate the idea of democracy, because these people who they're reaching out to certain groups of society don't have a voice to be able to reach out to other groups of society and try to appeal to them. We think that first, over time, you therefore reinstall the message that other Republicans are worthless. Donald Trump is the only one that. We think that first, why is this bad when we celebrate them then? We think that's very crucial when we say that celebrating hides the success, and he's saying that he gets the support based upon the fact that he can reach out to like these kind of groups. We think that neglects the idea that the right-wing media group and the biases are very crucial when it comes to catering towards his electoral success. At the end of the day, because we think that to celebrate is to marginalize these communities, we think vote for closing opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, opposition member. I would now like to invite the government whip to close the debate from the government side.
We think the fault of the entire opposition bench is that they mention a lot of problems, but these problems aren't exclusive to Donald Trump's campaign, right? We argue on closing government that these problems are something that's intrinsic within the American electoral system, and whether or not Donald Trump's campaign is celebrated or not, it has no impact or influence over the flawed electoral system, right? So first of all, they tell us that money currently dictates politics. Sure, we tell you it has nothing to do with Donald Trump's campaign. It's something that's intrinsic within the system. But second of all, they tell us the American public is buying into Donald Trump's racist or sexist comments. Sure, that means that the American public and the American society in general has an intrinsic bias within themselves. We don't think that it's something to do with Donald Trump. It's something to, in fact, we think it reflects the mindset of voters in general, right? But last of all, they tell us you're forcing moderate Republicans or those politically neutral people to drop out of the election and they don't want to vote, right? We tell you that it's just because there is the current pool of Republican candidates are not good enough to actually fit into whatever these politically neutral voters want, right? But we think it's not the fault of Donald Trump entirely. We think it's the fault of the Republican Party in general, right? They have to prove to us specific harms of Donald Trump's campaign, which is why today's debate, we think, ultimately boils down to two clashes. First of all, the practical effects of Donald Trump's campaign and whether or not it has done more good than harm, or vice versa. But second of all, whether Donald Trump's campaign is in fact morally justified, right? So first of all, on the practical effects, we think this clash is more important because ultimately policies should be about should be about practical effects and has less to do with good intentions, right? So first thing we heard, actually, my member actually talked about how Donald Trump is able to garner attention from the politically apathetic and neutral group of voters because it's actually seizing the opportunity of increasing its media coverage and so on and so forth, and he actively uses social media as a way to campaign, and it actually allows people who might not care about politics to actually vote. We think this is important because it means you increase the pool of voters and you increase the representativeness of the result of this election, right? The response we heard was, but then moderate Republican supporters are dropping out because of Donald Trump's campaign. We don't think that proved the causal relationship here, right? We want a response in their next speech. But moreover, we tell you the wording of this motion states that we should actually celebrate Donald Trump's campaign. And whether or not something is worth celebrating has a lot to do with whether or not the campaign itself is influential, right? The fact that it has been able to garner support from the group of people who would not initially give a shit about politics, it proves that Donald Trump has actually managed to garner attention from the American public. But yes, sir.
We agree that it's not inclusive Donald Trump's presidential campaign for drawing more people to care about the election. It's like Barack Obama drawing more Hispanics and blacks to care about American politics, man.
Sure, we think it's not mutually exclusive, right? But Barack Obama actually actively mirroring the sentiment of his the African American community is actually the same as Donald Trump wanting to seize the emotional vulnerability of these so-called angry white men, right? It's just a way of them campaigning. We don't think that we don't know what your POI is essentially, how your POI essentially will attack our case in any way, right? But moreover, we've told you how you increase the prominence of American election because it means that you force the candidates to actually engage each other, and you actually increase the competitiveness of the race. No response whatsoever. But what we heard from closing off was this. Closing off was this. First of all, they told us that Donald Trump is currently exploiting right-wing media groups, right? A few responses. First of all, the only incentive for why the right-wing media corporations would have the incentive to report on Donald Trump is because they feel like Donald Trump has the highest chance of winning, right? Because ultimately, the incentive and the only goal of these right-wing media is they want the Republican Party to win. So obviously, they would actually want to report more on those candidates who have the highest chance of winning. So that just actually buys into our narrative about how Donald Trump has managed to garner a lot of attention, right? But moreover, we actually want to argue that in fact by actually increasing the coverage of Donald Trump's campaign, that you allow other smaller candidates to actually increase its attention within the American public as well, because it means that when Donald Trump is actively attacking the campaign of like a smaller candidate, for example like Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, you actually force them to respond, right? So we think you would, first of all, in general, you make sure that you increase the discourse that happens within the election. But moreover, this coverage is actually good for the smaller candidates as well. But even if we take their case at their best and say that, okay, so the right-wing media is being overly biased and overly reporting Donald Trump, right? We still think that other sources of media, for example, the media from the more left-wing side of the spectrum, will actually already counter that. So we don't really see the significance of their problem. They're just scaremongering here. But so let's move on to the second clash about whether or not Donald Trump's campaign is morally justified. So first of all, on opening opposition, we heard that Donald Trump is racist and sexist, right? First of all, we've never heard justification of why candidates have a responsibility to be politically correct. We think the responsibility of candidate here is to actually echo the sentiments from the American public. And if the target audience of Donald Trump's campaign was these so-called angry white men, then so be it. We don't think there's any problem with that. The only harm they managed to prove was that, you harmed their children. First of all, we don't think there are children who are actively following with the Republican election, right? But moreover, they're not even allowed to vote anyways. So, and last of all, we think if the children are actually harmed, the parents should be there to guide them, right? It has nothing to do with Donald Trump's campaign whatsoever, right? But moreover, their idea of money, we see a contradiction here. Because the first speaker of their side told us how Donald Trump is bragging about how rich he is, and therefore he doesn't need the support of fundraisers, right? So we think that is good, right? Because their second speaker told us how currently politics are dictated by money, and people are winning based on fun because they are able to garner a bigger fundraising campaign, right? So if Donald Trump is bragging about how he's using his own resources to win and he doesn't need the support of fundraisers, then we think that it's beneficial under their paradigm, right? So we think they need to clarify their stance. Unfortunately, the opening has already finished, so whatever. So overall, we think that because our case has not been responded to and we've been able to add more nuance in this debate. Unfortunately, I'm not an American voter. I'm not going to opinion about my views anyways, but the fact that I'm in Hong Kong and I'm following so closely about Donald Trump's campaign already shows that he's able to garner attention from people across the globe. Very proud to propose.
Thank you, Government Whip. I would now like to invite the Opposition Whip to close the debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, today on Closing Opposition, we say that to celebrate Donald Trump's campaign and to celebrate the strategies that he has employed within his campaign to galvanize support and to galvanize so-called popularity, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that the strategies that Donald Trump has employed and the domination of the right-wing media within and in supporting his campaign, we do not believe that on side closing opposition, we do not believe that this is worth celebrating at all, ladies and gentlemen. Well, today, as opposition whip, I'll be summarizing the debate using two classes. Right? Firstly, how does it actually impact the election per se, ladies and gentlemen? And this has only come up in the debate in the closing half, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that this debate has essentially been a closing half debate because we do not see any tangible effects, any tangible impacts that have been discussed within the opening half, ladies and gentlemen. And secondly, I'll be discussing the debate, wrapping up the debate, through the lens of whether it actually increases the participation within the American society. Right? Well, before I move on to doing some clash analysis, allow me to offer a few rebuttals to side closing government. Well, they've told us their response to my members' argument of saying how moderate Republicans would soon drop out is that, oh, maybe these moderate Republicans are simply not good enough, ladies and gentlemen. We do not. We simply reject this premise on side closing opposition, right? Because we tell you the only reason why Donald Trump is so-called successful is because he gets a disproportionate amount of exposure in the right-wing media, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you he's only so popular because people are more exposed to them. People see him on television more often than the other candidates, right, ladies and gentlemen? Because of this, we tell you that his strategy, and that is exclusive to Donald Trump, his strategies that he used to gain exposure, we do not support these type of strategies by saying extremely racist, extremely derogatory stuff. We do not support this type of strategy simply to gain exposure. And we do not believe that this kind of atmosphere and this kind of mindset is what we want to promote. We do not believe that this is beneficial at all to the American elections in the long term, ladies and gentlemen. And on a second layer to that point, right? We tell you that the rise of Donald Trump actually also kind of brings along the radicalization of other candidates, right? Because we tell you when these candidates kind of learn that, oh, by saying radical stuff, by saying racist and derogatory stuff to by singling out these minorities, right? We tell you that, oh, Donald Trump can be successful, and this kind of brings along the radicalization of other candidates to follow suit, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you this sort of radicalization is extremely dangerous because we do not, on side of closing government, we stand for rational discourse and we stand for a plausible middle ground within the Republican camp and the Democratic camp. And that is why we believe that by celebrating Donald Trump's campaign, we're actually doing harm to the whole American election, both in the short term and the long term, ladies and gentlemen. Now moving on to the first clash, right? of whether it and how it impacts the election per se. We tell you on side closing government, a unique extension is how the celebration of Donald Trump is actually equivalent to the celebration of the domination of the right-wing media, ladies and gentlemen. As mentioned by my member, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that we do not agree, we do not support this type of disproportionate exposure given to certain candidates, right? We tell you that we do not celebrate this media, we don't celebrate media simply valuing the entertainment value of certain candidates, right, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that we actually, this type of disproportionate exposure given to Donald Trump actually drowns out the other candidates and actually does not allow the American population to be actually access the other campaigns of the other candidates, right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I tell you that is very dangerous because it limits the choices of the American population. Right? Before I move on, please explain.
But don't you think the supposed right-wing media and its racism supporting Trump existed before Trump?
No, but then we tell you, because of Trump's exclusive strategies that he uses to kind of galvanize the right-wing media support, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that there hasn't been any candidate within the American election that has been so strongly against immigrants, against Muslims, right? We tell you that Donald Trump is the first man to say such things, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that this kind of president is not what we want. This kind of thing is not what we want to happen in future elections, right? This is not what we want to see on closing opposition. And that is why we do not think, first, on this level, we do not think that he should be celebrated at all. And another unique point brought up by my member is that we tell you that when Donald Trump comes out as a candidate, right, he does not have to appeal to any kind of corporate agent. We tell you that we would rather have a Hillary Clinton who has to appeal to certain corporates like Goldman Sachs. We'd rather have her come out as a candidate because we tell you that at least she is accountable to these firms. At least she has a certain kind of audience that she has to support, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that this kind of accountability and this incentive model that Hillary Clinton might have to please her backers is something we want. It's something that's better in our paradigm than theirs, ladies and gentlemen. Now moving on to the second clash of whether it really increases participation within the American society. Well, what we've heard, a very absurd claim that really hasn't been elaborated on side of open government is how, we're actually galvanizing the in-between voters who might not fall into the Republican camp or the Democratic camp, ladies and gentlemen. Well, in my POI, I've already pointed out there really isn't a Democrat, there really isn't a candidate who's so-called fully Democratic or fully Republican, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that inherently within any kind of candidate, we tell you that this candidate has to have certain policies that are left-wing, more left-wing, certain policies that are more right-wing than others, right, ladies and gentlemen. So we do not have any response from side of government to that at all. So we do not believe that by celebrating Donald Trump's campaign, we can actually galvanize these in-between voters and have a better representation of these voters' voices. Because we tell you, firstly, it has already been represented within today's status quo, and we do not see any problem with that. And another and an extension brought up by side closing government is that how we can actually galvanize apathetic voters, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we tell you they haven't really characterized these apathetic voters for us, ladies and gentlemen, and why they would actually follow today's follow the debate on television, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that these apathetic voters are simply following the debate because of its entertainment value. Right? We do not believe simply by entertaining them we would actually encourage them to go out and vote, ladies and gentlemen. We see a very clear distinction between simply watching debates for entertainment and going out to actually voice out their opinions as to who should be America's next president, right, ladies and gentlemen. So what have I told you in my speech today, ladies and gentlemen? I firstly kind of summarize the debate into the two clashes, how our side, how closing opposition actually has outlined to you the impact it has on the election itself, and how we tell you that the whole government bench's case and how increased participation does not stand. Because of these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose. And please vote side closing government.
All right, thank you for Government Whip. I would now like to congratulate everybody once again for showing us such a wonderful debate. I would like to request the audience and everybody else to wait here, and we are going to give the decision soon. Oh, and you can also cross the floor and shake hands then.
Why did you take a single one?